So when we have a polar coordinates equations, we want to replace it with x's and y's. So we don't want to have r's, that's for sure. We don't want to have any trig stuff, that's for sure also. So we have to find a way to replace and substitute with rectangular equations. So those are this. We know that r squared equals x squared plus y squared. And we know that x equals r times the cosine of theta. And we know that y is r times the sine of theta. So if we could somehow manipulate this equation into getting r squareds and or r cosines or r sines, then we will be able to replace those with x's and y's. So to start off with, the first thing we're going to do is rewrite the cotangent and the cosecant in terms of sine and cosine, because that is much easier to deal with than cotangents and cosecants. So the cotangent is the cosine over the sine, the cosecant is 1 over the sine, and everything else about the equation stays the same. So still an 8, still an equal sign, still an r. So now I have a fraction times a fraction. Sine times sine is sine squared. So 8 cosines over sine squareds. Okay, now we don't have cotangents and cosecants anymore. We're getting okay. So now we're going to multiply both sides by our denominator, because nobody likes denominators anyway. So r times the sine squared equals 8 cosines. So this looks promising, r sine squared, right? That's close to r sine. And then cosine, well, that's pretty close to this. So what I'm missing here is an r. So I'm going to multiply both sides by r. That will give me an r cosine on that side. And multiply this side by r2. Well, r also, sorry. That gives me an r squared times the sine squared. And over here, 8 times r times cosine of the angle. Now this is looking much more promising. So one thing real quick here, I'm just going to write this as r sine squared, just for funsies. And over here, r times the cosine of theta. So now I see my substitution. R sine gets replaced with y. R cosine gets replaced with x. Everything else stays the same. So that's y squared and equals 8x. Okay, now you may not be able to recognize it, but this is in fact a rectangular equation because you only have x's and y's in it. So that is the rectangular equation for this type of a polar equation. Okay, and it graphs to a parabola, which you should recognize this up here as being a polar parabola.